Um, Starting again. Welcome everyone. We are doing the Know Your MIP number 4 that's focused on the Keg. So we're going to start with the wonderful Peyton, who's going to give us the non-technical MIP overview. And so that will kind of fill in at a high level for everyone. And then we'll also dig into the technicals with Sam, who also submitted a technical MIP that is now an RFC, right? Or it went to formal submission?
Yeah, it's RFC, yeah.
Cool. Okay. So maybe Peyton, do you want to start and give us kind of like what's the PEG? What's the KEG? How does it work? Kind of in terms of your MIP.
Yeah, absolutely. I did throw together a couple of slides here just to guide us as we go through, if that's all right. Hopefully everyone can see that. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Awesome. First time doing the presenting thing. So I do have your faces in front of me. So make wild movements if something goes wrong. Yeah, so just put together the non-technical Keg MIP to kind of partner with Sam's technical MIP that goes over the actual code that accomplishes this. So we'll be running through kind of both sides of that today. And yeah, guess a good place to start is kind of what is the Keg? It's a smart contract implementation that allows for MakerDAO to stream payments, specifically to stream DAI. What's really neat about that is that it is great for allocations set to be distributed over time. So things like budgets, we'll have some more examples in the following slide, but basically any number of things that we know are going to be going out to a bunch of people over a period of time. Like there's a pretty good chance the Keg might be able to cut down on a lot of bandwidth between governance and otherwise that we would use it for. The other cool thing about it is Sam set it up so it can actually pull from 2 distinct funding sources. One is kind of our general spending, right? The surplus buffer. Typically when people propose new projects, implementations, anything like that, it's generally funded through the surplus buffer, especially as we move away from foundation funding, like that'll kind of be the main go-to. But it's also built in a way that can redirect funds that were otherwise going to the flapper, which is our surplus auction method. So instead of taking like 100% of DAI that was going to be going to the buy and burn model, we could divert a little bit of it to different projects or implementations. So the 2 MIPs, I'm pretty sure mine still doesn't have a number, so it's still listed as like MIPX funding for the Keg, and then Sam's MIP, I believe that one's 34. Is that right, Sam?
Yeah.
34. Awesome. I don't know why I didn't put the numbers in. Sorry, but we can link those in the chat here. So kind of overview wise on why you'd want to utilize the Keg, because I mean right now you can just code payments into the executive spell, right? We could say, hey, we want to pay this many people, let's vote on it, and then we'll send it out once that vote passes. A number of the things we're doing are reoccurring, right? Like we might say, hey, we need I don't know, 10,000 DAI for this cause right now. And another month we'll probably need 10 or maybe 15,000. It's hard to say. So if you were to set a budget and be able to apply to the Keg funding, then that gives governance a way to allocate funds at a continual rate of time, basically either for a set period of time or until they decide to stop it. So this is great for like continual initiatives. I might skip ahead and go to like kind of some of the currently proposed ideas that would go well with the Keg. I just put out the, again, non-technical MIP for governance rewards, which is another idea of Sam's even already put together some of the initial code that we could basically flip on to use for that. But basically that would be one that we might want to utilize funding otherwise going to the flapper, because basically those are kind of our profits, right? It's money that the surplus buffer is full, and we're directing money into buy and burn. This would allow us to carve out a little bit for governance rewards. Likewise, if a strategic reserves initiative, Seb's been posting some cool stuff about that on the forum. Like, let's say we wanted to allocate like 50% of a total amount of funding to ETH, 25 to WBTC and what have you. We could basically set up a stream from the keg that sent it to another contract address that then swapped the DAI for those different currencies in that allocation. And then another kind of example would be the core unit budgets. This is one that would utilize the surplus buffer, right? Just a set amount of funding, like say, hey, we're applying for this amount of funds per quarter for this core unit. Currently, I know we have risk governance, a few other ones that have been posted, but basically a lot of them are looking at the neighborhood of like 65, 70,000 DAI a month. So having the ability to just say, all right, governance approves this, the community wants to fund this project, let's turn on the spout and keep them funded until we either decide they're not using the money right or they say they're going to need even more. So it really does kind of cut down on that common complaint in the forum. I think we saw this when Sam put on a signal request for the initial 100,000 DAI to be used for the multi-sig, an interim multi-sig wallet. Some of the comments on there was like, hey, this is great. Like, you guys clearly have stuff to pay for. However, aren't we just going to need to approve even more funds a little bit down the line? The Keg's a great way to kind of solve that problem. So definitely want to give people a chance to like read the non-technical MIP. There's a lot of stuff in there that might help further explain. But basically, I tried to break it out in a way that just made sure you needed to know and understand these three key terms when applying for it. Like I said, Sam's gonna go over the actual contract implications after this, but by just breaking it down into flight, rate, and flow, this will make it so even if you're not familiar with smart contracts, you can understand what these three are, and you could apply for Keg funding for a specific source. So a flight is basically just a set of addresses that will be streamed DAI and the ratio which they're receiving DAI compared to the overall allocation. So again, let's use the example of maybe the budgets for a core operating unit. You might have, like, say, 3 salaried position. So, hey, this person's receiving 100,000 per year. This person's receiving 80. This person's receiving 60. Then you could set up the Keg so it is continually funding their salary requirements, even though they're at a different ratio, which is pretty cool. And the way you would do something like that would be to set the rate, which is the next key term I pulled out here. And that is simply how many DAI per second that will be streamed from the surplus buffer. Obviously, some math there if you're doing allocations per year, but not too hard to break down. The other key term is called flow. And that's basically going to be when you're applying for an allocation of funds that are essentially profits, right? That are essentially otherwise going to the buy and burn mechanics. Flow takes a certain percentage of that and sets it aside. So Sam will get into kind of the technical ways it does that. There are a few tricky spots in that there can only be one particular stream pulling from the Flapper funds there, but basically we can set it up so then that stream is then split into further streams and fixes any problems there. If you're like me, that's like probably a lot to take in. So definitely want to pause here and ask for questions, like see, is everyone with us so far? Are there things I can go back and explain further? Yeah.
I mean, just a simple question right off the bat. The gas, the transaction fees, I guess the contract keeps some ETH on the side?
No, it does not. So somebody has to call these methods to stream out the payments. So usually I'm imagining whoever receives the payments will need to do that, or we'll have to set up some keeper system to take care of that.
Right, because this is basically just a contract that can handle the payments. So that might have to be a part of your budget request, is maybe requesting some DAI that will be then flipped for ETH. But yeah.
Yes, I guess for someone in Venezuela who's looking for a grant, I guess they're gonna make sure, they gotta make sure they have enough gas, or the grant, I guess, has to include the gas, right? Right, Amy, I guess? I don't know.
I think an ideal situation is that there's a grants core unit that is then, you know, like distributing it. I think the way that I see the keg, there's like different layers of granularity. So you might want to be like, where I see that what I've heard from also Sam is you don't really want it used for sending it to some one person directly, right? And then, but if you want to say like it's just kind of flapper, like if the MKR burn is, you know, alpha, and you just want to do A-1 or something, and you just want to split it, then it's simple enough. And then you might want to go a little bit deeper, but I'll let Sam probably talk a little bit about that. I did have a question that I get often after that, so I will ask at a every time. So.
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it, Amy. So yeah, I view it the same way. You shouldn't view this as something to go to every individual contributor. It's sort of just a router to pull funds out of the Maker protocol and give it to this sort of top level core units or Gov rewards or whatever, and then they'll further distribute to developers or whatever, depending on what the core unit is taking care of.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Cool.
Yeah, and this definitely took me a while to like going back and forth with Long, basically asking like, all right, so what would we, you know, what would make sense to allocate this for? And they are things that like are either going to be split up to a bunch of people, and particularly funding over time, right? So that would be the other thing. If you're just making a grant allocation of like 5,000 DAI, probably not a lot of reason not to just go through the standard spell there. However, if this were something that maybe it requires a continual funding source, or it's more of a employment type grant, then maybe the keg would make sense for it. But that consideration.
Well, I'll say even at the level of individual grants, as Amy said, like this should be sort of a grants core unit or something that's assessing this at a layer of abstraction between the keg or the manual vat.suck. That should be kind of removed from the end person who's getting the grant. Like we should be dealing in sort of larger amounts of capital moving to the big units.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a very good clarification. So plan is kind of to pass it off to Sam here for the more technical rundown. Are there any more like conceptual questions if you're having trouble maybe understanding what the keg might be used for, or I don't know.
To be honest, I don't really have anything to add. You covered it all, Peyton. So I think just Q&A and the technical side as well. Just ask anything. It's probably more helpful here.
Yeah, I would just say that I broke it down to like 3 things I thought you need to know in terms of like terms within the funding for applying. Like that was my approach for crafting the non-technical MIP. There are a lot more other codes and specifications and ways this gets done in Sam's contract that either A, I didn't understand, or B, I felt like would be too much for an average person maybe applying for a funding source to have to go through. But
yeah, you've definitely captured the high level parameters that are important here. So, I mean, we could go into line by line and go over the math, but I'm sure that's not really appropriate.
Awesome. I don't know.
Question that I've heard a few people ask, but does it have to stream? Like, and so instead of just doing kind of like one chunk and at a time, does it always have to stream?
Yeah, so I thought a little bit about adding that in, but really we don't need it in the keg because we can already do that with the spell anyways. So we don't really get any value add by adding that in. But I mean, it's doable through the spell. So if you want a one-time payment, you can get it. If you want a combination of the two, you can get it.
It will stream, like it's primarily default at streaming.
Yeah, Keg is only for streaming, but we can do one-time payments already with just this spell. But I talk through the feedback and frozen features. What do you mean by that, Robert?
Yeah, just the feedback period of 4 weeks and the frozen period of 2 weeks. How specifically does that work?
Yeah.
You go ahead, Peyton.
Yeah, sorry, Sam. So yeah, that was just for applying for actually using the Keg. One misconception I had that long had to clear for me is that the frozen period and the RFC, those can overlap, right? So if you aren't making any changes in the last 2 weeks, it would just be like a 6-week hold for applying. But basically that's so you can post your proposal for funding to the forum and have plenty of time for people to engage with it. Like maybe they might say, hey, this isn't ideal for the Keg, or hey, we have concerns about this money. So it's basically to give enough time for both the community to interact with the proposal and for the mandated actors to take a look at it. The reason that using the flow parameter, so using funds otherwise going to the flapper, it will take a little longer, is because we can only set up, this is where I might tag Sam in, but basically you can only be pulling a percentage of those funds. Like there can only be one continual stream. So say that we already are doing governance rewards, and then someone wants to add in building a strategic reserves. We'd basically need to do the math in the back end smart contract implications to make sure that both of those are being funded at the right rate, even though from the proposal standpoint, it's just a simple, hey, I want this much percent of it. So that's why that one was coordinated to take a little longer, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I was also just thinking more about I should have said this, more about the context of if you have a core unit and a budget attached to that, and I'm a facilitator. So does this also overlap into that process as well? Because once the budget's approved, right, that's approved through the normal MIPS process. Is this an additional process if we're using the Keg to fund a budget for a core unit?
Yeah, so there is going to be some interlap there that we're probably going to need some feedback on. But basically, like if you have a budget, ideally it would be very, we should make it very easy to say, okay, that works for the Keg. Let's flip it on and use the Keg for implementation. But basically the idea is that we don't know how each core unit is going to propose their budgets. So making it have to go through the Keg would seem like possibly something that could mess up a few things. But for a lot of things, it probably will want to use the Keg. So I don't know, it might make sense to add a little subunit or note onto the MIP itself, clarifying that if you do request continual funding, it'll go to the Keg.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So if you were a core unit that proposed, like, I don't know, for some reason, like 6 months, and then you don't necessarily also have to use the Keg. Like you can just say, hey, every month I want X amount and it to be delivered. We're going to deliver this at work, etc. So
you can definitely do that, but I don't know if you want to do that, right? Like having an executive where maker voters could potentially vote you down month to month is not really a way to do business. There has to be kind of this ongoing trust, and like I don't think it's really conducive to have to like do some work and then at the end of the month submit an invoice to governance and have them be like, oh nope, we're not paying for this. So like, okay, what do you do in that scenario, right?
It's about job security, yeah, for sure. And just playing devil's advocate, maybe I'm jumping the gun, Sam. Hypothetically, the surplus buffer did go very low and we had to mint MKR, how long would it take for the distribution of the new die if we had to, unfortunately mint new maker?
So that's kind of a separate process. I mean, if we start sucking more out of the surplus buffer than we're making, we will take losses. And if the surplus buffer runs dry, we will eventually have to start minting maker. And maybe there's like austerity you can do to the teams or something because of the lack of revenue. But like, yeah, I mean, you can continue pulling funds out of the surplus buffer as much as you want in theory, no matter what. We'll just start minting maker.
Yeah, like right now, for instance, it's growing at about 140,000 per day. So as long as we weren't pulling out that much, the stream would still be positive.
Mm-hmm. What's your question, Amy? Okay, so did you read correctly that anyone can send money to a keg, not just maker governance? Yes. So the keg is essentially just a router. It just takes payments in from whatever source, ERC20 transfer, and then routes it to a bunch of endpoints. So really, it's not even, the keg itself is not really specific to even maker. It's just, yeah, generalized payment routing thing.
Has there been any discussion? So austerity came up, and I thought that was, I smiled a bit, but it's actually, it could be a likely scenario. So if a budget is tied to a core unit and there's been some agreement on that, and then if the surplus buffer runs low and some sort of austerity needs to be applied, has there been any discussion on that and how that would happen?
Not really. Yeah, I don't know. Times are good right now, but yeah, then we may have bad times in the future. So probably something to consider, but personally, no, I haven't really discussed it with anybody.
Yeah, and I tried to keep that in mind in terms of the stopping payments section of the non-technical keg, which would standard have like a delay, but did clarify that like in an urgent or emergency situation, the facilitators might deem that a signal request like with a short duration is an appropriate action to take to pull the community. So in theory, we could be shutting it off pretty quickly, like in a week or two, if we saw something coming up on the time horizon.
Yeah, thanks. That's just super helpful in looking at proposing any sort of core units and then trying to plan around the entities and structures that would be working within that core unit to deliver on goals and objectives that are being set by the facilitator. So yeah, something to be considered. Thanks.
Yeah, and ultimately, I guess I'd want to add that this is just a tool, right? So we tried to envision a lot of different ways this could play out, both positive and negative. But there are undoubtedly utilizations that we haven't thought about for it yet. So hopefully by leaving it as open as possible, that means that any neat ideas for funding or otherwise could come through this and happen pretty quickly, all else being equal.
Sam, could you unpack how flights are registered or the addresses? I think I'm not quite getting that part.
Yeah, so flights are basically just a string that like you can tag basically where you're sending the money to at sort of a human level. So it can be something like, I don't know, smart contracts core unit, just literally call it that. And then there's end addresses for that. Maybe it's just one address, that's fine. And they get 100% of the money flowing through that route. But yeah, those are registered by governance through the normal spell process.
That's what I thought. Thanks. Appreciate that.
What's the current idea for the best way to do it? Should there be streams towards individual contributors, or should it all just go to one address, and then that one address, whether it's controlled by a single facilitator or some multi-sig, then distribute it according to the budget, kind of at their own discretion. I'm curious about like the different ways people are thinking would be ideal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably easier to go with stream the funds to a multi-sig or something for the core unit, or some sort of like high level structure that can then further send the payments out to all the contributors and stuff like that, and they can use whatever payment mechanism they want. So the Keg's not really meant to be completely arbitrary payment distribution to the last person. It's sort of just the very high level routing tool for, yeah, I would think at the level of core units is where you should think of it, I think.
I got it. And so like the other day, there was a presentation from a company called Accountable. So they would be a service provider to core units that wanted to offer like fiat payments and like kind of a more traditional range of benefits for their employees. And the idea, I think the way that it worked was that the payment would go straight to them and then they would do all of that. So in this case, they would just get a Keg route through a single contract address, and that's how they would set it up, right?
Yep, absolutely. So it's just a ERC20 transfer. So if most things accept that, then it would just take the die and do whatever it wants with it.
Got it. And so besides the Keg, the alternative way to get funds is through just a straight up request through the MIP14 protocol die transfer, right?
I mean, that's a governance route. Ultimately, it's
Okay.
all just a manual vat.suck, which is what we've been doing until we get the Keg online. So yeah, that just goes vat.suck in the spell. It's the same for anything, no matter what the governance process.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I was just thinking because I don't know if like Accountable or another similar company would want like a upfront or like some sort of deposit, like depository level, like deposit for service basically, and that's what I'm kind of interested in. Because if it's streaming, then it might not be ideal for that service provider.
Yeah, so we can do that now, and we'll still be able to do that once we get the Keg. It's
Yeah, cool.
yeah, manual payments.
And yeah, I guess I'll add that the goal is for this to be on for the March governance cycle. So if you do have any ideas, questions, like things for improvement for the MIPS, at least the non-technical one in particular, since that was the one I worked on, please throw them up in the forum or feel free to ask here. Do want to make that as good as possible before we end up voting on it. So.
Are there any core units that are looking to use that company Accountable from, I think they're from the Philippines, right? Are there any core
I
units?
think it's Denmark.
Denmark. Okay. How trusted are they? I mean, the first time I logged into their website, their certificate was expired, so it was like a non-secure site. Anyway, just wondering if any core units are thinking of using their services.
So operational support, like one of the things that we were talking about was collecting resources. So we are doing some, due diligence before we actually even suggest it. But at the same time, everyone should do their own due diligence for sure. What we can do is provide a list of options. I do think it kind of depends on what your need is. So some people might prefer Opolis because they can, they work in the US and they want to be able to move employer to employer. I think of with Dennis's kind of company Accountable, theirs is more servicing the employer. So Opolis, like I think of Opolis as an employee. And so we can have like an endless, resource list of all these for sure. But I did chat with them, and it also varies like what the ask is, because they on their side, they will also do a risk assessment. So assessing whether, because you're signing with them themselves. It's a little bit, sorry, off topic. I got a little off topic, but. We should have another call on that.
No, that's cool. So you're saying Opolis. So hypothetically, Sam was working with the risk unit. He would have to give up his KYC AML to Opolis, or you follow me? Like, imagine Sam was an American citizen and he had to give up his social and home address.
Ops is a little bit different. Actually, they're going to come on the community call that David is hosting in March, right, David?
Yeah, we haven't solidified a date, but it's looking like March, early March.
Yeah, I think once we have more resources, we are able to compare them. Right now, I think we just have 1 or 2, maybe 3 I was looking to, but very quite limited. Another thing, I don't know if everyone got a chance to read the Flapper distributor, which is sort of like one one of the use cases that Peyton was kind of going through. And I think there was like a lot of discussion about it, but essentially instead of the flights being core units, for example, it could direct to an operational budget that then distributes to core units, that then distributes to its contributors. And then you can have a like a charity or a like kind of Gitcoin fund or something that then is just meant for that. So I'm wondering if anyone read that and actually like thought of that as using the Keg at that level of abstraction versus it being directly tied to core units. If not, maybe Sam, if you want to describe also a little bit. There's a little picture in there in the forum post.
What do you want me to describe?
If you had any thoughts on that, because you did also work with Long on kind of drafting that way before the Flapper or the MIP as well.
Yeah. So I guess the initial use case I had for that is the DSS Gov rewards. That seems like a prime candidate for where to route profits. But yeah, as you say, Gitcoin grants seems like another place where we have profits available, cycle it back into the whole ecosystem a little bit. I don't know, really it's up to governance. Yeah, there's lots of options.
I'm curious if people had thoughts, because this is sort of before the core unit concept, but the core unit essentially is what the operations is supposed to be. But wondering if anyone had opinions or thoughts about that.
I guess one kind of cool comment I could add to what I was writing is Long did use the example of like the strategic reserves that I tried to poorly walk through it in my presentation. And I just thought that was like a very neat use case in that it would allow us to say, all right, we're going to take this percentage of profits of our extra die, and we're going to basically build kind of an asset buffer to help us keep through bad times. But I guess what's just so exciting about this is that it makes like, you can pull die constantly, or you could pull a percentage of profits. So it really just adds those kind of tree branches to fund either stuff that we absolutely need or stuff that we want to be funding when times are good.
I think there's a community call where Seb actually modeled out like a possible way that strategic reserves could be structured and how they would work. And there's a nice thread with some diagrams too, making it visual. It's pretty cool.
Anybody here who's creating a core unit that is wondering, like maybe specific to the core unit implementation for the Keg? Derek, I don't want to put you in the spot, but I know like smart contracts was thinking of more of a streaming one.
I think you just put me on the spot. Well, yeah, so definitely, and Sam's a part of that conversation as well. We're thinking of streaming, yes. How we model that specifically to a multi-sig, we still have to discuss and figure out that operational model. But yeah, exactly what Sam and Peyton have talked through is what we're thinking of at the moment.
Any other questions or topics people want to cover?
I got one I was thinking about earlier today, and Sam, I know you and also David touched on it just now, talking about so the streaming function of the Keg is designed to stream to, let's say, a core unit multi-sig, for example, not necessarily to individuals. What would be the complexity? Because I'm sure people would, in fact, like to be paid at a streaming rate from a multi-sig. What would be the complexity in offering such a thing, or perhaps working with, I don't know, Gnosis multi-sig type offering that would allow individuals to be paid as a streaming, in a streaming manner from another entity or wallet in this case?
Yeah, so the Keg's designed to be sort of generalized coming out of Maker basically, but we can totally plug it into, and I think this is totally the domain of a third-party service where we don't need to build an entire payment routing system. These exist all over the place. So I think we can just tap into some third party that accepts ERC20 transfers.
Cool.
Yeah, and actually the Gnosis Safe has Safe Layer like integrated into the apps. Like they have apps inside the multi-sig, so you can just do it straight from there.
Oh, cool. Okay, awesome.
So I would just do some due diligence. Just because it exists doesn't mean it might be fun to do.
And yeah, also, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but it's not that the Keg couldn't stream to individual addresses. It's just that for various reasons, you may not want to do that, right? In case someone leaves or walks away or that sort of thing. But it's designed to just split up between the addresses. So if you did want to pay people directly through that, you could do that. It would just be kind of a judgment call on if that's the best way to distribute funds or not.
Yeah, that would be more just, I view that as too much overhead for governance. They shouldn't be dealing with, because every one of these payment routes you set up, you have to go through a spell, and governance should not be dealing with, you know, payment to somebody doing like $1,000 of work on a one-off situation. Like that shouldn't be like something governance deals with.
I wonder if you can do that for like an audit. So if you use like a MIP14 and then you get someone to do an audit, and then you could stream it and completes when it's finished. Maybe you don't want to stream at that point.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can do whatever you want. It's a little bit weird, right? That's more of a human level thing where you want to like kind of verify the work's done and it's good and stuff. But just a tool, you can use any number of use cases.
So David had a good question in chat. He was asking if the Keg has a bandwidth for like a max number of streams. It's my understanding that you can basically do as many flights as you want to. The only limitation is on the actual flap tap, the tapping of the funds going to the flapper otherwise, if that's correct, Sam.
Yeah, there's no limit to the number of routes you can set up, but each route does have a limit on the number of ways it can split out. So like you want a reasonable number, like maybe 1 or 2 or 3 end targets per route. I don't know what the exact limit is, it'll hit the gas limit at some point. But yeah, basically you don't want to do a single payment that can fan out too much. It'll just cost too much gas.
And then another kind of cool question. Sorry, Sam, to keep throwing it at you, but from Greg in the chat about storing DAI from the keg on XDAI or some sort of L2 solution to stream the payments.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, anything is possible. Again, it's just a general ERC transfer out, so you can connect it to any other service.
I was going to say the same thing. I don't quite understand the code, but from what I've looked at and what everyone has talked to, like it's just awesome. It's just a really great tool that truly gives the power to the community to decide how it's used, and can be used in a number of ways that just kind of like ideologically we may want to take advantage of, that are to our own benefit in terms of minimizing governance actions and stuff like that.
Just for next steps in the keg, I think one of the security considerations that you mentioned was the flap tap, which you'd have to modify the core protocol. Wondering if, like, well, you said it's kind of simple and it should be easy to kind of modify, but carefully considered. Can you give us like any other insights into what some of the risk might be?
Yeah, so the keg itself sits outside of the maker protocol. The tap which pulls from the surplus buffer at a regular rate, that one's pretty safe, but there is another contract called the flap tap, which does need to insert itself between the surplus buffer and the flapper, which require, yeah, as I said in the thing, it requires modifying some code. It's not horribly complex to analyze, but it will require more scrutiny than the other stuff for sure. And yeah, the smart contracts team can help me out with that when we're ready to go online.
Yeah, it seems like maybe it might be a good time to give like a last call for questions or comments. Really appreciate everyone coming out, and if there's anything left that hasn't been answered, here's your chance.
All right, then I think we're gonna, oh, did someone want to say something?
I just wanted to thank you. It was great, but I'm wondering if next time we could possibly do questions verbally.
Sorry, questions. I didn't get the last.
Verbally instead of typing, verbally.
Yeah, feel free to speak up right now if you do have any questions that didn't get answered.
I didn't know that we could ask them verbally, so I didn't write them down, to be honest. Sorry, I'll do it next time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's good feedback. We should make sure to clarify that next time, and we will post the link here to the MIPS on our forum, and then that way, if they come back to you, you can type them up there, and we'll answer them that way.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Peyton and Sam. This was really cool, and it's a crazy crypto world that we live in. So it's yeah, I was just like caught off guard when I was just thinking about the Sablier and how we're just doing all this. So magic money for sure. All right. Well, thank you for everyone who also came. And if you have any questions, we'll be posting also the video follow-up to this, and we'll also be posting it on the forum post as well. And you can also ask questions there if you'd like. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.